Has anyone been watching the videos, by the way? Do you find it helpful? This could be interesting. There we go. Yeah, so it's on the YouTube channel, and if you could subscribe, that would be great. I wanted to talk about the subplot. I didn't get to this last time, but then it occurred to me as well, and I'm going to get to the subplot. But I thought a few words about the general perspective on history would be helpful, because it also occurred to me that the way Shakespeare presents his plays, I talked about the Elizabethan world picture and the world view, and the fact that there was a moral and a Christian perspective brought into the entirety of it, what was there, but there's more to it than that, and it's a whole view of what constitutes matters worthy of drama and worthy of the dramatist's interest. And this is primarily dependent on its view of what history is and what it means. So in the sense of what events are and what they mean and what ought to be recorded and what the recording of the events ought to do as well. He's leaning on a whole classical and Christian tradition here. And the reason I say that is modern historiography and even modern drama, never mind modern drama, modern versions of history a lot of it will focus on economics, on material things. So they'll do lots of analyses of, the GDP of the country at the time. They'll look at a lot of socioeconomic factors, but primarily economic factors, and seeing how important they were in influencing history. That's very common in historiography, and that goes whether you're of the Marxist school of history, and Marxist was a materialist and an economic. He regarded economic necessities as driving historical narratives, or whether you're on the capitalist side of things these days. When I say capitalist, the Western non-Marxist view, they still think that economics is basically what drives history. So when Bill Clinton wrote notes to himself in, I guess, the late 80s, no, it would be in the 90s, that it's the economy, stupid, to himself, to make this case to his audience, talk about economics, he was just expressing the view of a consensus across the board that economics really were what drove human actions. You don't see that in Shakespeare's history plays or Shakespeare's drama at all. He's not talking about economics. He's not interested in it at all. It's not a matter of interest to him, and he shares then that view with the ancient world and with his contemporaries. He's not doing something new here, other than I actually think the fact that he includes the commoners in his plays as substantial players is to some degree a break with tradition.
But isn't that also economic to appeal to all the classes?
No, it's not. It's an appeal to all ranks of society, and their rank is not because of their economic standing. In North American understanding, low class, middle class, and upper class is a judgment on somebody's wealth. That's not the case in Europe. You can be an aristocrat and be poor, but you're still an aristocrat. Now you ought not to be, and it's a problem if you are, and then you end up like Lord Grantham, with a great estate and a title and noble conduct and an understanding of how you ought to operate, but you don't actually have the means to support that lifestyle, and you can't do what you were born and bred to do. That's a challenge historically because of the Industrial Revolution, et cetera, But strictly speaking, those who are in the working classes, which is what they call them in Europe, they don't call them lower, because it's not that they're lower, it's that they have to work for a living, whereas Lord Grantham does not have to work for a living. That's the point, which is the very thing that qualifies him to be involved in politics, according to the ancient way of looking at things. If you busy yourself with having to work and make money, you've got too much skin in the game. you're not going to do things for the sake of the common good. You're going to do it out of naked self-interest. So politicians in our day often have huge financial, not just huge financial wealth, but they are still invested in the very businesses upon which their governments are involved in making decisions. And so the self-interest becomes a question when they're doing things allegedly for the sake of their country. So it's a serious problem. And it's an ethical boundary. Now, it used to be solved by simply, if you are involved in any way in the business world, or in that sense, or worried about having to make your own living, you cannot be involved in politics. It was like a firm, clear, bright line. Now that changed when to be a politician became an occupation, and people started getting paid to do it. And that is not in Shakespeare's day. That doesn't exist. So the parliamentarians would tend to be aristocrats, and we may have our issues with that for whatever reasons, but there are certain understandings of what happens in politics, and it's not motivated by self-interest, or at least not in the economic sense. They have a totally different self-understanding. So what they are working with is the classical understanding of what goes on in history. So a classical historical account, say that of Herodotus, or of Thucydides amongst the Greeks, or Livy or Tacitus amongst the Romans, are concerned with politics, the political life, what happens in the city-state. And they're largely concerned with what is said and what is done by great individuals. So it's focused around people. And we see this in Shakespeare's history plays. There's a lot of interest in individuals and importance being ascribed to those individuals. Now, it's obvious in the history plays when we have a king. But even here, Duke Angelo, or when he comes to this position, we're really looking at his character, and the city of Vienna will rise or fall depending on what his moral character is like. The whole city will be drawn into that. And that's because Shakespeare agrees with the classical historians, and for that matter with Scripture, to some degree, that it's the character of the leaders that will bring up or down their entire country. And therefore we ought to pray for those in leadership. There's no mention in Scripture about the need to get your economy on whatever, like the economic emphasis of our day. It's just not there in Shakespeare. And so he ignores all of that. It's not that it's not important, but he largely ignores it. So it's largely an investigation and exploration of human character and their moral choices, which will either benefit or destroy their country. That's the focus there. So strong biographical emphasis. And the object of the narrative, as we see it in this play or any of the other plays we'll look at, is moral. That's the preeminent concern. And if there's a moral failure, which there always is in the Shakespearean play, either it will be resolved happily in a comic sense, or tragically in the sense that the bad guys are going to be dead. But in one way or the other, there will be a moral equilibrium restored. Now, when Shakespeare says this, he's just reiterating the beliefs of the classical world as well.
Now, was he mandated to say that?
No, he just believed it.
Okay.
Because everybody said it.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody suggested, other than, again, I would go back to what I said last time about Machiavelli. Machiavelli was more of a pragmatist. You have to appear to be virtuous, but you mustn't be virtuous, because to be virtuous would be counterproductive. You must appear to do the right thing, but if you actually do the right thing for the right reason, which is what Plato said you ought to do, if you actually try to do that, you will fail. Because at the end of the day, it's all about maintaining power and control. For Shakespeare, this is a scandalous suggestion, and it's a new suggestion. And in this play, as I said, the reason I thought I would bring that in here is because I wasn't, in reflection on what I said last time, I wasn't sure that it was as clear to you as it would have been to Shakespeare how scandalous the Machiavellian view would be. And then when we look at the Duke and what he does with this character, Angelo, so he intentionally puts a man in office who he thinks will not be up to the task. he sets him up to fail in order to do some of the dirty work that he doesn't think he can do. That's a very pragmatic thing to do. He's using somebody. So he could be seen as a Machiavellian politician then. He could be seen that way. And that's, I think, without giving away, I don't think he is. But that we might think that was the case, because that's exactly what a Machiavellian politician would do. Right? You use people as a means to an end. And all things are there simply for holding on to power and getting things done. Very pragmatic, utilitarian, uses people in the same way you would use a product. Don't regard them as somebody that bears the image of God. Don't regard yourself as accountable to divine justice. Don't think that your character matters to what's going to happen in the events of history. That's, whether it's a caricature or not, that's called the Machiavellian view. In our day, it's just called, well, that's politics. What in Shakespeare's day was scandalous, in our day is commonplace. And we're told that, if you're somebody who is an idealist, you can't be in politics, which is a cynical view. And it might be a realistic view, but it's an indictment, and no society, in my view, can stand on such a foundation. Because I am in agreement with the ancient world in its assessment that there is a reckoning for moral corruption on the body politic. It brings it down. On the other hand, I'm also with them in the sense that it comes down because of this weight of what we will call sin, and there is a restoration, however, because in God's providence, he will bring things out of that, but only, that doesn't mean that's going to help us particularly. We may be the generation lost in the wilderness. Right? So that's Shakespeare's view, and it's the one that he's portraying here in Measure for Measure, and I needed you to at least get a sense of where he was coming from. Is that helpful, clear, a bit clearer? I think you will see it, all the tragedies adopt that same perspective. So there's the moral agency of the ruler is essential. Of all things, it's his moral character that matters the most, which is what Plato thought, what Aristotle thought, what every Christian writer thought, what the ancient world thought. Everyone thinks that moral character is the most important thing, and therefore in histories they portray men and women, and it's their moral actions which we are looking at. Are they moral or are they immoral? If they're moral, they are blessed in the plays. If they are immoral, they're going to come down. And a lesson is being taught to the audience. You do likewise. Whereas in Game of Thrones, to flog that old horse, there is the exact opposite lesson taught, which I think is not realistic, although in our day it's said to be realistic. Well, this is the way the world is. Well, actually, no, it's not. I see that play, even though it's set in an ancient world and a never, medieval framework, it's a commentary on the contemporary world and its view of what reality is, which I regard as unreality, and not a lasting one at that. But let me get to the subplot. I know you want to. Do you want to weigh in on that before I move on?
I feel like most people are actively trying to get people they don't see as moral out of office. They're not putting those people in. And those people aren't very successful in office in the long run.
Not if they're nakedly immoral, no. So they have to appear virtuous. That's correct. They have to be good hypocrites. But once they're exposed as hypocrites, then they want them out.
Right, and the truth comes out.
Right.
Especially in this day.
Yeah, with the media being the nature of like the 24/7 news cycle and all of that, and everyone having a smartphone, you can record things, and yes, there's no hiding. And then dredging up pictures from a decade earlier, or a video taken and stuff, like when you did something silly, and that will destroy a career, or somebody said this and the allegation's been made. The mere allegation of sexual impropriety is enough to bring people down. Just the allegation. And so people do that, like Brett Kavanaugh in the States, the Supreme Court. There was the allegation of rape, which it appears there was no substance supporting that allegation. But it was attempted to bring him down. Aside from she said, right? But her friends didn't, who were around her, had no memory of her even being there. And, there was a whole host of evidence that suggested that she was just trying to bring him down, including her own testimony now, after the fact. But it's highly effective, and people want to believe the worst of people, furthermore. So that's there, but those are the times that we live in. Shakespeare would regard our age as a age of great darkness, moral darkness, even while we benefit from more wealth and privilege than any generation previous to us, aside from the moral fabric of our country, which is at a low point in some respects. So let me come to the subplot, because Act 1, Scene 2 now shifts the subplot, and it, to some degree it reflects what I have just said, and to some degree it works like the subplot always does, as a foil to the main plot. So do you know this word foil? A foil is an actor who acts like a mirror to the main actor. So there's an actor and then another actor who acts as a foil. Often they're twins in Shakespeare's comedies. When we come to Hamlet, we will have Fortinbras as a foil, and also his prospective brother-in-law. In King Lear, we'll have Edmund and Edgar. They are foils for one another. They happen to be brothers. One's a good guy, one's a bad guy. They are there to illustrate the character. And again, it's all about character. What do we notice about this guy's character and this guy's character? And the two of them are making that moral contrast evident to us. So here we now have Lucio coming forward. Now, Lucio is an aristocrat, and in that sense, like the Duke. The Duke, as we saw last time, was too devoted to the vita contemplativa, or in the Greek, I'll put the Greek above it, the theoretical life, the life of the philosopher, the life of the mind, the vita contemplativa, which was the philosopher's way of living, which was bequeathed to the church as the Christian, the monastic way of living. There are two types of lives according to Aristotle, this one and then this one, the bios politikos, or in Latin, because they simply assumed and presented the same thing, the vita activa. Do you live the contemplative life or do you live the active life? Those two lives are still represented in Shakespeare's own day. And those are the only two lives that Aristotle regards as worthy to be called a life. You can live like Socrates and live for the truth and the pursuit of the truth. This would be the academy. Or you can be a politician. Politician not in our modern sense, but in somebody who acts in the public square for the public good, speaks and acts. And action is his métier. He's there to act. That's the purpose of the political life, is to do things, get things done. Here you're thinking about it, here you're doing it. Now the Renaissance man is the combination of both. You must behold the good and you must do the good. You have to balance those two. This character, the Duke, has spent too much time thinking about the good and he's refused to act, and he's let his little city of Vienna go to seed as a consequence. We have a foil here in the name of Lucio, who is likewise an aristocrat, but unlike the Duke, this man is corrupt. And he hangs around with the common people. And why does he do so? Because he's given over to his own base motives, his passions. In other words, he seduces women. He's involved with prostitution. And his passions are what rule him, not his mind, not his reason, his passions. So he's a corrupt individual. His name is Lucio. In that sense, his name is a foil to Angelo, because Lucio means light, just as Angelo sounds a bit like an angel. So these are men who are, on the surface, admirable characters, but actually beneath that, there's a very soft underbelly. And so this man lives and operates with the commoners. Now, when I say the commoners, we could think that Shakespeare, by referring to the commoners, was thinking as of the common people as people who are subhuman, just like the passions. But we find, in fact, when we look at Shakespeare's commoners, that although they are subject to comedy and we laugh at them, there are often many noble commoners. And so this is why I say it's not quite so simple. It's not upper and lower. There's the commoner, the what eventually becomes the working class come the 19th century. But these are the commoners. What we don't have in Shakespeare's day, which emerges in probably Jane Austen's day, is this middle class, the wealthy merchant class, which starts probably in the 18th century, where the nouveau riche, people who were commoners, they worked hard for a living, they got wealth, and the wealth has made them probably in many ways more wealthy than the aristocrats. So they claim to some degree what comes with their money, that is power. But there's no place for them in that pecking order. You're a commoner or you're an aristocrat. Where do they fall? Neither. They have the wealth and means to elevate them above that station, but that money does not admit them to the aristocracy, because that's a title, it's something that you inherit. But what they will observe, and this is what makes Shakespeare sympathetic to them, and Austen even more sympathetic to them, is because even though they're called aristocrats, and aristos in Greek means the best, the aristocrats are not always the best. They've just inherited their title. So we might have your Lord Grantham, who is probably one of the best, in the sense that he's a moral character and wants genuinely to do the good, and in general does do the good. But we have also many who are resting on their laurels. They've inherited the title based on the great deeds of their forebears, and they themselves don't act that way. So that's the problem. You have a static hierarchical system that doesn't reflect the actual moral conduct of the people there. And many of the people who are working in the wealthy merchant middle class may be actually better people than the aristocrats. And so they get real conflict in there. But we're not there yet, because there is no wealthy middle class in Shakespeare's day. Not really. There are the commoners, there are the aristocrats. So the commoners, these people whose position it is to be loyal, who Shakespeare seems to love as much as Tolkien does and Lewis does. This man, Lucio, is consorting with them. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but the reason he does is because he is debauched. He actually is there because he is a sewer dweller. He's a swamp creature, to use, like he's part of the swamp, to use contemporary parlance. Now, this man he lives a life of leisure, but he embodies the very unbridled lechery of the city of Vienna that the Duke has let go to seed. The Duke himself is not a debauched man. He's just been too ignorant of doing his duty, but he is not exploiting his power and his station in life to let his passions run wild. He's not doing that, whereas this man is. So he's a foil to the Duke. So he's a gentleman, but he behaves like a commoner. He talks like them. He acts like the worst of them. He's common. When you were talking, I don't know if people say that anymore. That's common. Don't talk like that. That's common. No? Does anyone say that anymore? No? Okay. That was my grandmother. by which he meant vulgar. That language was so common. Don't say that. And she wasn't derogatory about the working class. It was just, that's vulgar common language. Don't use that term. As a result, he refers to something that, as I said last time, has resulted from this. Venereal disease has entered the city of Vienna. Now, the head of the brothel there, who was a fascinating character, Shakespeare calls her a bawd, B-A-W-D. Her name is Mistress Overdone. So she's an old prostitute. She's been overdone, I guess. And never mind, I guess you get it. Don't have to explain any further. She is now the head of the brothel. And we hear from her the immediate effect of placing Angelo in the position of power and allowing him to do what he sees best. And the effect of that is that he has ordered that all brothels immediately be demolished, leveled to the ground. Let me pick it up here. Because the problem also arises in Act 1, Scene 2 that the rest of the play will seek to resolve. So Pompey enters as well. Pompey is another aristocrat of sorts. And we'll enter it in line 85. Mistress Overdone. How now? What's the news with you? says she to Pompey. Yonder man is carried to prison. Well, what has he done? A woman. But what's his offense? Groping for trouts in a peculiar river. What? This is vulgar slang again. What, is there a maid with child by him? No, but there's a woman with maid by him. You have not heard of the proclamation, have you? What proclamation, man? All houses in the suburbs of Vienna must be plucked down. And what shall become of those in the city? They shall stand for seed. They had gone down too, but that a wise burgher put in for them. But shall all our houses of resort in the suburbs be pulled down to the ground, missus? Why, here's a change indeed in the Commonwealth. What shall become of me? Come, fear not you, good counsellors lack no clients. Though you change your place, you need not change your trade. I'll be your tapster still. Courage! There will be a pity taken on you. You that have worn your eyes almost out in the service, you will be considered. All of this is a subtle, don't worry, I'll continue to use your services. Don't worry, I won't put you to work. I'll look after you, as it were. What's to do here? Thomas Tapster, let's withdraw. Here comes Signor Claudio, led by the provost to prison, and here's Madame Juliet now enters the subplot. Angelo is the brother of a young woman that we have not yet met by the name of Isabella. And he has been caught in the act of a crime. What was the crime? Sex outside marriage. I'll read on here. Claudio, to the provost, which is a sort of a officer of the court. Fellow, why dost thou show me thus to the world? Bear me to prison where I am committed. I do it not in evil disposition, but from Lord Angelo by special charge. Thus can the demigod authority make us pay down for our offense by weight the words of heaven. On whom it will, it will. On whom it will not, so. Yet still 'tis just. And then Lucio comes in. Why, how now, Claudio, whence comes this restraint? From too much liberty, my Lucio. Liberty! As surfeit is the father of much fast, so every scope by the immoderate use turns to restraint. Our natures do pursue, like rats that raven down their proper bane, a thirsty evil, and when we drink, we die. So he gives the analysis of his own plight and his analysis as a moral judgment. He was too free, and therefore he's now being restrained. Now remember I talked about liberty and license. And liberty without restraint of moral conduct, invariably becomes licentious, sinful. So why is he being restrained by the law? Because he was too free. Free in his affections, as it turns out here. And so as a consequence, he is being imprisoned. Now Lucio is shocked at this. Because he sees in Claudio a worthy man, somewhat of his social rank. How is it that you're not a common man? How is it possible for you to be in fetters, that is, in being led away by the police officer for having committed sexual indulgence? I mean, he does that all the time. What's going on in this city? If I could speak so wisely under an arrest, I would send for certain of my creditors, and yet, to say the truth, I had as lief have the foppery of freedom as the mortality of imprisonment. What's thy offense, Claudio? What but to speak of would offend again? What is it? Murder? No. Lechery? Call it so. Away, sir, you must go. 1 word, good friend, says Claudio. Lucio, a word with you. 100, if they'll do you any good. Is lechery so looked after? Thus stands it with me. Contract. Now he explains what the actual offense was. Upon a true contract, I got possession of Julietta's bed. You know the lady, she is fast my wife. Save that we do the denunciation lack of outward order. This we came not to, only for propagation of a dower remaining on the coffer of her friends, from whom we thought it meet to hide our love till time had made them for us. But it chances the stealth of our most mutual entertainment, with character too gross as writ on Juliet. Okay, so to paraphrase, what has happened is that he has a marriage contract, so he's betrothed to this lady. He's not yet signed the contract. Why has he not signed the contract? Because there is a dowry which they wanted first for him to give to her family as a dowry before they would do that. So he's doing it because he wants to bless the family. And yet he has not waited till the marriage contract is signed before sleeping with his prospective wife. And now the knowledge of the deed is writ on her. In other words, she is showing signs of pregnancy. So he didn't sign the contract, but now there's a sign of another sort of action. For that, he is going to prison. So it's not just that he hasn't been visiting a den of prostitution. He has slept with his prospective wife before they were married, legally. That's it. Okay? So, Lucio, with child perhaps, unhappily even so. And the new deputy now for the Duke, whether it be the fault and glimpse of newness, or whether that the body politic be a horse, whereon the governor doth ride, who, newly in the seat, that it may know he can command, lets it straight feel the spur. Whether the tyranny be in his place, or in his eminence that fills it up, I stagger in, but this new governor awakes me all the enrolled penalties which have like unscoured armor hung by the wall so long that 19 zodiacs have gone round and none of them been worn. And for a name now puts the drowsy and neglected act freshly on me, for surely 'tis surely for a name. So why the act that he's being accused of had never been actually brought in force for 19 years. So for 19 years, nobody has even been charged with these offenses. Now he's being accused for it, and he says it's like armor, shiny armor that sits on a wall and is gathered rust. It's never been worn. It's not shiny. Nobody even notices it's there, and now it's being put on, and he says that he's doing it for show. Is it because of his character, or is he doing it for show? He thinks that he's accusing him of a Machiavellian trait. He's showing he's virtuous, but he isn't really. That's his judgment. Lucio says, and he's happy at this response, Lucio. as long as he's not really virtuous, that would be awful. Like he can't, as long as he's just trying to pretend to be virtuous and like a rider on a horse, he's sticking the spurs in to show the horse that he, when I tell you to go, I mean go, so I'm going to hit you with the spurs. So he's being hit with the spurs of the law to show Vienna that he means business. So he's making a public display of him. But he's not going to continue on this path. Heaven forbid that he should actually really be moral, then we'd be in serious trouble. Note the dialogue here. So Lucio, I warrant it is only for a name. And thy head stands to tickle on thy shoulders that a milkmaid, if she be in love, may sigh it off. Send after the Duke and appeal to him. I have done so, but he's not to be found. I prithee, Lucio, do me this kind service. This day my sister should the cloister enter, and there receive her approbation. Acquaint her with the danger of my state, implore her in my voice that she make friends to the strict deputy. Bid herself assay him. I have great hope in that. But for in her youth she is a prone and speechless dialect, such as move men. Besides, she hath prosperous art when she will play with reason and discourse, and well she can persuade. I pray she may, as well for the encouragement of the like, which else would stand under grievous imposition. And as for the enjoying of thy life, who would I be sorry should be thus foolishly lost as a game of tic-tac? I'll to her. I thank you, good friend Lucio. Within 2 hours, come officer away. So, Lucio has been sent to get his sister, and his sister to go to implore the Duke. Why his sister? She's pretty. And he's going to implore her. How is she going to implore him? By being pretty. In her youth, there is a prone and speechless dialect. She doesn't have to speak. She has to show up and look pretty. And the Duke will be moved by this. Now, this is the debauched judgment of men who are given over to that. Fine. It's also probably an accurate judgment. This is the way of the world. But he says, in addition to this, besides, she hath prosperous art, such as will play with reason and discourse. Oh, and she's able to talk as well. She happens to be good at speaking. But that's not the first thing he points to. And that's not the first thing that Lucio is going to encourage her to do either. He is going to appeal to something other than her intellect. Now, in Act 3, or Scene 3 here, the Duke and Friar Thomas, and I've already gone over Act 1, Scene 3, in which the Duke now talks about what he is planning on doing and what the state of affairs is and why he has ceded authority to Angelo. And whatever we think of that, whether he's a Machiavellian or if something else is afoot, we'll come to decide that later on. But let's go straight to Scene 4, where we've just seen the Duke with Friar Thomas, and the Duke is going to be disguised hereafter as a clergyman. And on the other hand, we have Isabella and Francisca, who is a nun. And remember, Isabella is about to be sworn into the cloister and will be approved as a nun. So she's taken some time to get to this stage. So we go from the den of iniquity, Vienna, to places of holiness. And these are again foils. There are two cities here. There's the city of God and there's the city of man. The cloisters represent the city of God. How do these two relate to one another? How does Christian character change the course of a culture that is gone and given itself over to sin because of its too great liberty? Act 1, Scene 4. Isabella. And have you nuns no farther privileges? Are not these large enough? By the way, what Isabella means by privileges is, do you not have any more restraint here? Isabella wants to be under rule and to have her passions so constrained that she has no liberty to do anything. And she calls that a privilege. So I don't know if you know the type, but this is an earnest young woman who wants to be godly, but is probably tempted. Now you have to read into this. Why would a woman who's about to be sworn into a nunnery want her liberty further curtailed? Because she's cutting herself off from the world already. Why would she want this? Other than that, she desires things which she probably ought not to. So can you not stop this desiring? Can you do it from the outside? Both, in other words, she's a little bit like what the Duke is doing at the outset. Let's try and curtail sin by external restraint. And I said to you, this never works. Nobody can make you a good person from the outside. They can make you law-abiding, but they can't make you good. Anyway, and she asks, and have you nuns no farther privileges? Are these not large enough? Yes, truly, I speak not as desiring more, but rather wishing a more strict restraint upon the sisterhood, the votaress of St. Clare. And then from within, Lucio, ho, peace be in this place. Who's that which calls? It's a man's voice. Gentle Isabella, turn you the key and know his business of him. You may, I may not. You are yet unsworn. When you have vowed, you must not speak with men, but in the presence of the prioress. Then if you speak, you must not show your face. Or if you show your face, you must not speak. He calls again, I pray you, answer him. And then she goes out. Isabella, peace and prosperity. So she's not been sworn yet into the order of the sisterhood, so she's still able to speak to men. Once she goes in there, she will not be able to. Is there not something ridiculous about that? Of course, but those are the rules. Now again, Shakespeare is looking at this issue of rules, law, liberty, sin, goodness. How do these relate together? So the attempts to keep sin hemmed in. How do we do this? How is it effective? How is it ridiculous? And he's demonstrating that the sister, her actions here are ridiculous. She should speak to the man. She's the one actually that's already sworn in. Well, you're a member of the world still, so you can talk to him with you. Right, okay. Peace and prosperity, she says. Who is it that calls? Lucio comes in. Hail, virgin, if you be. As those cheek roses proclaim you are no less. Because she blushes now at the insinuation that she might not be. Can you so stead me as bring me to the sight of Isabella, a novice of this place, and the fair sister to her unhappy brother Claudio? Why, her unhappy brother, let me ask, the rather for I now must make you know I am that Isabella and his sister. Gentle and fair, your brother kindly greets you, not to be weary with you. He's in prison. Woe me! For what? For that which, if myself might be his judge, he should receive his punishment in thanks. He hath got his friend with child. Sir, make me not your story. As in, don't joke with me. 'Tis true, I would not, though 'tis my familiar sin with maids to seem the lapwing and to jest. Tongue far from the heart, play with all virgins so. I hold you as a thing enskied and sainted by your renouncement and immortal spirit, and to be talked with in sincerity, as with a saint. Now he's, playing it up. You do blaspheme the good in mocking me. Do not believe it. Fewness and truth, 'tis thus. Your brother and his lover have embraced, as those that feed grow full, as blossoming time that from the seedness the bare fallow brings to teeming foison, even so her plenteous womb expresseth his full tilth and husbandry. These are agricultural ways of saying she's pregnant. Someone with child by him, my cousin Juliet. Is she your cousin? Adoptedly, as schoolmaids change their names by vain though apt affection. She it is. Oh, let him marry her. This is the point. So her solution is, he's got her pregnant. She knows that they were an item. No, not canoodling, that they were an item. They were betrothed to be married. They weren't canoodling. She wouldn't know that. She knows that the two of them had plans to be married, I presume. And he's sort of, got ahead of things a little bit here. Well, we'll let them be married. Okay, that's the solution. This is the point. The Duke is very strangely gone from hence, bore many gentlemen, myself being one, in hand, and hope of action. But we do learn by those that know the very nerves of state, his givings out were of an infinite distance from his true meant design. Now this is the real Duke, not Angelo. Upon his place, and with full line of his authority, governs Lord Angelo, a man whose blood is very snow broth. One who never feels the wanton stings and motions of the sense, but doth rebate and blunt his natural edge with profits of the mind. Study and fast. He, to give fear to use and liberty, which have for long run by the hideous law, as mice by lions, hath picked out an act under whose heavy sense your brother's life falls into forfeit. He arrests him on it, and follows close the rigor of the statute to make him an example. All hope is gone, unless you have the grace by your fair prayer to soften Angelo. And that's my pith of business twixt you and your poor brother. Doth he so seek his life? Has censured him already, and as I hear, the provost hath a warrant for the execution. Alas, what poor abilities in me to do him good? I say the power you have. My power? Alas, I doubt. Our doubts are traitors to make us lose the good we oft might win, by fearing to attempt. Go to Lord Angelo, and let him learn to know, when maidens sue, men give like gods. But when they weep and kneel, all their petitions are as freely theirs as they themselves would owe them. I'll see what I can do. But speedily, I will about it straight, no longer staying but to give the mother notice of my affair. I humbly thank you. Commend me to my brother. Soon at night I'll send him certain word of my success. I take my leave of you. Good sir, adieu. Okay, so that's the end of that scene, and she agrees to do this. Action, go to the Duke and implore him, and she, or not the Duke, but Angelo, and assumes that Angelo will listen to her, of course. Now we get this wonderful speech, Act 2, Scene 1 here, when we have the debate between Angelo, Aeschylus, and remember we looked at Aeschylus last time. He's an ancient lord, renowned for his wisdom and counsel, at least of all those in the kingdom. He is the best reputed for counsel. And an interesting dialogue here, so just let me pick up a little bit of this. Angelo, we must not make a scarecrow of the law, setting it up for fear, to fear the birds of prey, and let it keep one shape till custom make it their perch and not their terror. The law actually has to be imposed. It has to bite in order for men to be afraid of it. So we have to do something with this. Obviously, there's a debate between Aeschylus and him about what's just transpired. Aeschylus is saying, do you not think you're overdoing it a little bit here? Well, we mustn't let the law be like a scarecrow, in which the birds aren't even afraid of anymore. They use it as a perch. It doesn't scare them off anymore. And Aeschylus in response, aye, but yet let us be keen and rather cut a little than fall and bruise to death. Alas, this gentleman whom I would save had a most noble father. Let but your honor know, whom I believe to be the most straight in virtue, that in the working of your own affections, had time cohered with place, or place with wishing, or that the resolute acting of your blood would have attained the effect of your own purpose, whether you had not sometime in your life erred in this point, which now you censure him, and pulled the law upon you. So you would have done likewise if time and occasion had permitted. This is entirely possible. Just think about that. 'Tis one thing to be tempted, Aeschylus, and it's another thing to fall. I do not deny the jury passing on the prisoner's life may in the sworn 12 have a thief or two guiltier than him they try. What's open made to justice, that justice seizes. What knows the laws that thieves do pass on thieves? 'Tis very pregnant. The jewel that we find, we stoop and take it, because we see it. But what we do not see, we tread upon and never think of it. You may not so extenuate his offense, for I have had such faults, but rather tell me, when I, that censure him, do so offend, let mine own judgment pattern out my death, and nothing come impartial. Sir, he must die. So don't tell me what I might have done. When I do such a thing, then you act in accordance with my actions in the same way I'm doing there. So if I commit an offense like he has done, then take off my head likewise. But for now, it doesn't matter if there are people in the jury who've committed worse offenses than the man that they're trying. He's been caught. Now, is this a good argument? Angelo seems to completely disregard the Christian principle to judge yourself in considering the offense of the person that commits the crime. You need to consider, what would it have been like this in this situation? You need to consider context. So there's the principle, and then there's the application of the law. And what harm has actually been done here? Yes, he's violated the law, but what are the extenuating circumstances? What's the harm? What's all the specifics there, which are part of judging cases? It's not that the law hasn't been broken. There's no dispute over that. But how severe is the offense? So would you execute somebody for when somebody runs in front of a car and gets run over? Do you execute them for first-degree murder? You don't. You consider the circumstances. Right? And you would not do that, but that's effectively what's happening here. And he's saying, don't say it on hypotheticals, the case being, and don't say what I might have done. When I do this, then judge me likewise. So he's calling upon himself for the same sort of thing that effectively Oedipus is doing, by the way, in Oedipus Rex. You know, when I catch that murderer, I'm going to take care of him. He is the murderer. He is the one who's committed incest and so forth. Yes?
I agree with you on what you're saying, but I'm wondering how that draws out of kind of Christianity, because of things like, for example, when in the Old Testament, when a man trips and accidentally touches the ark and is struck dead on the spot.
Yes.
Or in the New Testament, it talks about like sin is sin, and like regardless of context, we all like committing sin doesn't really matter what your context was or what your reason was for sinning. You've still done it. So I'm just wondering where the connection is there.
Well, sin is not all sin. First of all, I don't think that that's true. And I do think intent matters. I'm not saying that it isn't sin, but actually your intent does matter. And your repentance is also a factor in the execution of the sentence upon you. So what the prisoner is given an opportunity, for example, in such cases to utter a plea. What's your plea in light of the charges that have been brought against you? If you plead not guilty, that will be considered as an extenuating factor in the judgment that's taken upon you. If you express no contrition, then you will receive the full weight of the law on this issue. If you ask for mercy, plead circumstances, that is considered, because your motive for doing it is a consideration in the sin, which is not to deny the sin, but it is to say that your heart is a factor in that, because Christianity and God looks at the heart and not merely at the outward actions. Okay? Getting to the ark and the touching of that gets into the holiness of God and something that I think that's a different case, but that takes us away from this one here. I could talk about that some other time, but it doesn't really fit here. But that's always a case in Christian law, that you consider those things. You throw yourself on the mercy of the court. Consider circumstances. And again, even in the Old Testament, there are cases. There's the 10 Commandments, but then there are various extenuating circumstances to be considered there, which are the case law. And the English common law, which is rooted in that, understands all that, and then those become precedents for later legal actions to follow. Anyway, so this is what they say, this interesting discussion at the outset there. In other words, Angelo is a legalist. who doesn't understand the purpose of the law, the function of the law. The law is not there to punish. That's not the purpose of the law. Remember, I talked about the 3 purposes of the law. You can't get rid of sin by judging. The sin remains. Remember, I talked about 3 functions of the law last time? Angelo is correct that the law has to be enforced, otherwise there is no point to the law. It has to be enforced, but it doesn't have to be enforced in its most strict and merciless sense. That is not understanding the law properly, not as a Christian, and he isn't judging the way a Christian would. And as we will find out, that's because he's an outrageous hypocrite, which is almost always the case when people are harsh in judgment, actually. But anyway, so he may be, Angelo, a Machiavellian. He may well be, wanting to be seen to be a pure figure while knowing in his own heart that he is nothing like that. Any rate, interesting discussion at any rate. Now the provost enters, and then all of these clowny characters, and I'll skip over that as humorous it is because it really is humorous, of Pompey and Aeschylus and all of this sort of thing, and I'll skip over that. But what we find here, and this is really interesting, is that he refuses to judge the bawds, by which I mean the prostitutes. He won't judge them. He's judging Claudio, but he won't judge the prostitutes. Why won't he do this? Because they make him sick. They're beneath his contempt. He's disgusted by them. He's going to judge Claudio to death for impregnating his fiancée, who had every intention to marry his wife, wouldn't let him do that, wants to execute him, but will not prosecute the bawds. Let's see if I can find the lines here. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can right now. This is my notes, but this is what they get off for this. No, I'll just skip over it, but it's right there in Act 2, Scene 1. Don't have the lines in front of me right now, but let's go to Act 2, Scene 2. Lucio, who, as I said, his name means, has connotations of light, but is associated with lust, suggests to Isabella, because here he's trying to work like a dramaturge figure. So this is another sense in which he is a foil for the Duke. Remember, the Duke has now removed himself from the position of power. He's sitting in the background, watching what's happening as Angelo executes judgment in a way which is actually potentially disastrous, but he's trying to teach him a lesson about judgmentalism. He's sitting in the background, but he's orchestrating things from behind. In the same way, we will see that Lucio will prompt Isabella to act in a certain way. And how does he prompt her? Well, he prompts her to act in a way that is going to awaken the lust in Angelo. So I'll come to this section here. Just before this. The servant, line 18. Here's the sister of the man condemned. Here is the sister of the man condemned, desires access to you. Hath he a sister? Aye, my good lord, said the provost, a very virtuous maid, and to be shortly of a sisterhood, if not already. Well, let her be admitted. See you the fornicatress be removed. Let her have needful, but not lavish means. There shall be order for it. Enter Lucio and Isabella. Provost, save your honor. God save your honor. Stay a little while. And now to Isabella. You are welcome. What's your will? I am a woeful suitor to your honor. Please, but your honor, hear me. Well, what's your suit? There is a vice that most I do abhor, and most desire should meet the blow of justice, for which I would not plead, but that I must. For which I must not plead, but that I am, at war twixt will and will not. So she doesn't want to do this. Why doesn't she want to? Because lust is something that she hates. She's telling him, and yet she is actually pleading on behalf of her brother, who's fallen prey to lust. So that, Angelo. Well, the matter. I have a brother is condemned to die. I do beseech you, let it be his fault, and not my brother. And then the provost. Heaven give thee moving graces. So now he sees the possibility of a sister of mercy coming in and persuading Angelo away from the course of action. The provost has been trying and he's failed. So he sees now the opportunity here. Okay, so the provost, wanting the good to come about. Condemn the fault and not the actor of it. Condemn the sin and not the sinner? That's what you want me to do? Why? Every fault's condemned ere it be done. Mine were the very cipher of a function to find the faults whose fine stands in record and let go by the actor. Oh, just but severe law. Now she's delighted with the response. She's a foil for Angelo. Two seemingly virtuous characters, very much alike. The one so saintly that his breath is snow broth. The very saintly image, Angelo. On the other hand, we have the woman about to go into the cloister who wants more regulation to keep sin. It's her sinful lusts in check. Both of them struggling with this probably. Oh, just but severe law, I had a brother then. Heaven keep your honor. Aside to Isabella. Give it not over so. Him again, entreat him. Kneel down before him. Hang upon his gown. You're too cold. If you should need a pin, you could not with more tame a tongue desire it. To him, I say. Must he needs die? Maiden, no remedy. Yes, I do think that you might pardon him, and neither heaven nor man grieve at the mercy. I will not do it. But can you, if you would? Look, what I will not, that I cannot do. But might you do it, and do the world wrong, if so your heart were touched with that remorse as mine is to him? He's sentenced, 'tis too late. Lucio aside to Isabella, you are too cold. So you have to, he's beside him here, beside her here, and he's speaking in her ear, like, I guess, like in those cartoons where you've got the devil's advocate sitting and talking on his shoulder. He's like, come on, you're too cold, warm up. Too late? Why, no, I that do speak a word may call it again. Well, believe this, no ceremony that to great ones longs, not the king's crown, nor the deputed sword, the marshal's truncheon, nor the judge's robe, become them with one half so good a grace as mercy does. If it had been as you, if he had been as you, and you as he, you would have slipped like him. But he, like you, would not have been so stern. Pray you be gone. I would to heaven I had your potency, and you were Isabel. Should it then be thus? Says Isabel, no. I would tell what 'twere to be a judge, and what a prisoner. Aside to Isabel, I touch him. There's the vein. Your brother is a forfeit of the law, and you but waste your words. Alas, alas! Why, all the souls that were forfeit once, and he that might the vantage best have took found out the remedy. How would you be if he, which is the top of judgment, should but judge you as you are? Oh, think on that, and mercy then will breathe within your lips like man made new. What's she referring to here? Do you understand the context? It's referring to Christ. All the souls that were forfeit once. They were all given over to the devil, all condemned to judgment, eternal death. That was once the case. And he that might the vantage best have took, that might have stood on his high horse, stood above all of that, who had no sin in him, found out the remedy. How did he seek the remedy? He became a man. And how would you be if he, which is the top of judgment, God, should but judge you as you are. Oh, think on that. And mercy then will breathe within your lips like man made new. Think about the sacrifice, the atonement that Christ made for you. As sinful as you are, that he did not judge you, but rather gave himself up for you. Think on that. And then mercy will come to out of your lips like man new made. Be you content, fair maid. It is the law, not I, condemn your brother. Okay, now he's softening. He's now distancing himself from it because her words have had an effect. It's the law, not I, condemn your brother. Were he my kinsman, brother, or my son, it should be thus with him. He must die tomorrow. Tomorrow? Oh, that's sudden. Spare him, spare him. He's not prepared for death. Even for our kitchens, we kill the fowl of season. Shall we serve heaven with less respect than we do minister to our gross selves? Good, good, my lord, bethink you. Who is it that hath died for this offense? There's many have committed it. Aside to Isabella. Aye, well said. The law hath been dead, though it hath slept. The law hath not been dead, said Angelo, though it hath slept. Those many had not dared to do that evil if the first that did the edict infringe had answered for his deed. Now 'tis awake, takes note of what is done, and like a prophet looks in a glass, that is a mirror that shows what future evils, either now or by remisses, new conceived, and so in progress to be hatched and born, are now to have no successive degrees, but here they live to end. Yet show some pity. I show it most of all when I show justice. For then I pity those I do not know, which a dismissed offense would after gall, and do him right that answering one foul wrong lives not to act another. Be satisfied. Your brother dies tomorrow. Be content. So you must be the first that gives this sentence, and he that suffers. Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant. Okay, now she's talking about his potency and his merciless judgment. And now Lucio, aside to Isabel, that's well said. Note now that even the corrupt figure of Lucio is being moved not by her, grab him, get down on your knees, grab his cloak. His words are hitting him, and he's, that's well said. And now this famous speech. Could great men thunder as Jove himself does? Jove would never be quiet. For every pelting petty officer would use his heaven for thunder, nothing but thunder. Merciful heaven, thou rather with thy sharp and sulphurous bolts splits the unwedgeable and gnarled oak than the soft myrtle. But man, proud man, is dressed in a little brief authority, most ignorant of what he's most assured, his glassy essence, like an angry ape plays such fantastic tricks before high heaven as makes the angels weep, who with our spleens would all themselves laugh mortal. Oh, to him, wench, he will relent. He's coming, I perceive it. Pray heaven she will win, this is the provost. We cannot weigh our brother with ourself. Great men may jest with saints, 'tis wit in them. He in the less foul profanation, aside to Isabella. Thou art in the right, girl, more that. That in the captain's but a choleric word, which in the soldier is flat blasphemy. Aside to Isabella. Art thou advised of that? More on it. Why do you put these sayings upon me? Because authority, though it err, like others, hath yet a kind of medicine in itself, that skins the vice on the top. Go to your bosom, knock there, and ask your heart what it doth know that's like my brother's fault. If it confess a natural guiltiness such as his, let it not sound a thought upon your tongue against my brother's life. And now Angelo turns aside. When he turns aside, this is Shakespeare's way of doing a thought bubble. Like he doesn't have any means of doing it. He turns aside and now he's thinking, and the audience can hear his thoughts. That's what the aside does, right? He can't. In a film, you could cast it over with an audio while the man is sitting there with his lips closed, and you'd be hearing his thoughts. But the aside functions the same way. She speaks, he thinks, and 'tis such sense that my sense breeds with it. Fare you well. Gentle, my lord, turn back. I will bethink me. Come again tomorrow. Hark, how I'll bribe you. Good my lord, turn back. How? Bribe me? I with such gifts that heaven shall share with you. You had marred all else. Not with fond sickles of the tested gold or stones, whose rare are either rich or poor as fancy values them, but with true prayers that shall be up at heaven and enter there ere sunrise. Prayers from preserved souls, from fasting maids whose minds are dedicate to nothing temporal. Well, come to me tomorrow. And now Lucio, go to, 'tis well, away. Heaven keep your honor safe. And now aside, Amen. For I am that way going to temptation, where prayers cross. At what hour tomorrow shall I attend your worship? At any time forenoon. Save your honor. God save your honor is what it said. Now Angelo, on the stage by himself. Now we see his heart revealed. From thee. God save your honor? From thee is his response. I need to be saved from you. Even from thy virtue. What's this? What's this? Is this her fault or mine? The tempter or the tempted? Who sins most, huh? Not she, nor doth she tempt. But it is I that, lying by the violet in the sun, do as the carrion does, not as the flower, corrupt with virtuous season. Can it be that modesty may more betray our sense than woman's lightness? Having waste ground enough, shall we desire to raise the sanctuary and pitch our evils there? Oh, fie. What dost thou? Or art thou? What art thou, Angelo? Dost thou desire her foully for those things that make her good? Oh, let her brother live. Thieves for their robbery have authority when judges steal themselves. What? Do I love her, that I desire to hear her speak again, and feast upon her eyes? What is thy dream on? O cunning enemy, that to catch a saint, with saints dost bait thy hook. Most dangerous is that temptation that doth goad us on to sin in loving virtue. Never could the strumpet, with all her double vigor, art, and nature, once stir my temper, but this virtuous maid subdues me quite. Ever till now, when men were fond, I smiled and wondered how. But now he is. So, a virtuous woman who's genuinely virtuous makes him lust for the first time. He claims, not true as we will find out. But that's his monologue here. Now note how the foils have set themselves up, and the foils have done very interesting things, because in the process of the dialogue where one foil meets another of the same ilk, they depart from one another. One appears what she actually was, virtuous, through the test, and the other, who appeared virtuous, has now had his sin revealed. And Shakespeare is doing this, and life has a way of doing this. All things will be revealed. The heart is being revealed. Again, the law can do certain things, but it cannot fix the problem of the human heart, which is where sin springs out of, because of original sin. That's what Shakespeare is addressing here. And the problem of the kingdom gone to seed, which the Duke has allowed to go to seed, needs to be rectified. But how is it going to be rectified? Well, it can't simply by bringing in the law and crashing it down. That's not going to fix the problem. That'll just be all sorts of dead people. But the corruption will remain. Hearts need to be mended, and that is going to take the work of the Duke and, I would say, divine providence for that to take place. But we'll come to that when we come to it. I think we are out of time. So read on. We've got two more.